All right. Welcome, everyone. I'm Amanda Singer with West Coast Family Mediation Center, and very excited today to have Bridget Potterton here. Bridget is a real estate broker, and she has many designations and initials after her name, and I'll let her share more about what they all mean, but just a little bit about her. She's a realtor with Keller Williams, and she is a certified divorce real estate expert, and she's also a real estate divorce specialist. And so Bridget and I are going to talk today about what is often one of the most important and usually one of the most kind of highly valued assets in a divorce, and talk about the home as well as other real estate property, whether it's rentals or second homes, and what that's looking like, especially in this market now, being in Southern California. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So welcome, Bridget. I'd love to have you introduce yourself a little more and explain what some of those designations mean.
Thank you so much, Amanda, for having you. It's wonderful to see you. I know I've known you for a very long time, so I appreciate you having me on today. Yeah, so I have been a real estate professional for, I can't believe it, but 18 years. And just briefly, probably about 15 years ago, I had my first divorce uh, escrow. I was representing a buyer who was buying a home from a couple who was getting divorced, and it was by far the hardest transaction I had had up to that point. After weeks and weeks of delays and complications, I swore to myself I would never do another divorce transaction again. And here I am almost 15 years later as a certified divorce real estate expert. So, about 12 years ago, I started working with a mediation center who has now changed the name. And Amanda, you are one of the co owners of this center. And I started working with couples who were going through a divorce through mediation. And I went out and got a designation for it. I wasn't excited about it. I definitely needed a couple of swift kicks to kind of get me in line to do it because they are challenging. They can be emotionally exhausting. I don't have to tell you that, Amanda. I'm sure you've seen it all on your end. And but it definitely was a need that wasn't being met here in San Diego County. There is a lot of great education for realtors and brokers, but there was not a lot of great education for realtors and brokers going through helping their clients through a divorce situation. So we were all making a lot of mistakes that we didn't know any better. And I look back early on at some of the things I did and I cringe because I didn't know any better.
Mhm.
And so after getting my real estate divorce specialist training, I decided to become a secret specialist. So for about another, let's see, that was in 2013, I believe, or early 2014. I became a real estate divorce specialist and told nobody except for maybe you and about four or five other attorneys and mediators. And I thought, okay, I'm just going to work with them, but I don't want anybody else to know my dirty little secrets. And so I did. I was a secret specialist up until about 2 years ago, where I finally just said, what am I doing? This is ridiculous. I need to start sharing it with people because there's not a lot of realtors and brokers out there in San Diego who have any sort of designation or special training. And it really is critical because these are not traditional transactions. And I think that as realtors, oftentimes we don't see what some of the pitfalls can be when you have a transaction that where there is a divorce or some sort of separation.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point and something that, I'm always talking about with my clients, that, I mean, okay, especially here in Southern California, I don't know. I heard the number once of how many realtors there are, and I was like crazy, right? Because I know that there's some that do 0 or 1 sale a year, and that's not you. I know, Bridget does. I don't know how many you're doing, but you are left and right selling and helping people buy homes. And so, I think that what comes up is everybody knows a realtor, right? Whether it's a friend or a family member or that person that leaves the flyer on your front door telling you what they sold your neighbor's home at. And so there's just, I think that there is so many realtors out there that people aren't always realizing that there is a difference, right? And there is a difference to understand if you work with somebody who is a certified divorce real estate expert, they understand not only the divorce process, but how to help you through that with the sale of your home, if that's what you have to do, and buying if you're looking to buy a new one. So can you share kind of some of the ways that you might look at things differently and how you kind of work with the divorcing clients?
Absolutely. And you are right. To your first point, there are, I think, around 23,000 licensed realtors in San Diego County, and only about 5,000 of them have done any business in the last 12 months. So that's doing, one transaction. So there are a lot of people who are licensed, who are part-timers or things like that. And I think you're right. It is natural for people to want to work with their previous realtor or their cousin or their best friend or something like that. And in most cases, that's not a bad idea. Unfortunately, in a divorce or even in a mediation, as I'm sure you experience a lot, is there is some sort of communication often between the parties. But if they have an issue that comes up, whether it be child custody or anything else involved in the divorce, if they start to have issues there, then they can start to have issues with the sale of the home. And that can certainly make it complicated. And I've been trained in order to help alleviate a lot of that. While we use the same purchase contracts and listing contracts, oftentimes in a divorce, the way we do things are extremely different. I do things in what would be considered a completely backwards way in residential real estate. So just for an example, one thing that I do different is I take the listing contract and I get it signed um, well into the process. As realtors, we are taught, get the listing contract signed and figure out everything else later. And in the divorce realm, it's actually quite the opposite. There's a lot that needs to be done. I need to do an intake with both parties separately. I need to do a walkthrough of the house. And I need both parties to know that I'm working on behalf of the estate. So in traditional real estate, our client is whoever is on title. That's how traditional realtors work. In divorce sales, it's actually not that way. My fiduciary duty, is to the overall estate, not just who's on title. So I have a duty to be a neutral third party to both parties, regardless of who's on title, regardless of who's on the loan. And a lot of times what happens is if you don't do it that way and you have, say, an in-spouse or the person who is living in the property not on title, then you have a big mess on your hands by not doing it that way. So that's one thing is I take an additional oath as a certified divorce real estate expert to be a neutral third party, where I don't have to do that as a traditional broker. The other thing that is different is in residential real estate, we are pushed and encouraged to do dual agency, to make more money or to do more transactions. And even in my traditional business, I refuse to do dual agency because I think there's too many ethical issues. And I know I'm one of the few brokers who probably feels that way. However, for divorce transactions, I absolutely do not do that. So not only would I never represent a buyer when I'm selling a property going through a divorce, but I also encourage these homeowners who are selling their home, if they want, to go back to their previous realtor or their friend who's a realtor when they go to buy their separate properties. Because at that point, there is no need, if the other party's not involved in the transaction. So
Mhm.
it's a very unique way of doing it, but I find that it's helpful. Then they feel like they can choose to work with their friend again or whoever they want, and I rarely will represent them on a buy unless both parties are in writing are okay with that. Just because the difficult part is the sale of the home when you have two parties, and so that's where my strengths really can kind of come into play and help clients get through that chapter of their life.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And to me, as mediators, we work as a neutral third party, right? So that resonates with the way that we work with our clients. But I know that you are working with clients going through divorces that are not just coming from mediation, right? You are definitely, working with clients who are in litigation and are in often very contentious litigation,
Mhm.
and recognizing that you are there as a neutral, you're there to work for the estate. And, I think something you mentioned that people might not think about is that the communication is very different, right? You talked about doing separate intakes with them.
Mhm.
And I think that that's important because although most of my clients in mediation would probably be willing to meet together, there may be sometimes some different interests. There may be some hesitation on one of them, one side versus the other, of actually selling. And so, the fact that you're able to have those initial conversations and understand where the clients are coming from, I think is so important. And then that second part that you talk about, the not even just the dual agency, which I understand and agree with you, but just thinking about, most realtors, of course, are going to say, well, I'll help you sell it and then I'll help you buy another home. And so I think that that's a really interesting point, that you're focusing so much on making sure that sale is done correctly, and then most of the time they may use another realtor to buy. And I think that that really puts you in always thinking about what's best for the estate as a whole.
Mhm. Absolutely. And, early on when I was, working with, actually, I believe it was a referral through your company. Early on, I would do the intake and the appointments together if they preferred it. I remember one they invited me over, they were having a glass of wine together, and I thought, wow, this is amazing. I have learned since that even when they get along, that's probably not the best thing to do, because there is a reason that they are separating it, that they are getting divorced, and one may be overpowering the other, whether they realize it or not. There may be some issues there, so I don't do that anymore. But certainly, that was the case early on, because you just don't know. And treating the clients as separate clients, the way that I go in and meet with them, as I explained, you're my client and you're my client individually, and I'm treating this as an estate. But early on, I made as I mentioned, making mistakes. I can look back and think, I treated it as a listing, as a whole listing, and the reality what is that I don't do that anymore.
Mhm.
I treat my one client and the other client the same, but I don't usually involve them unless they want to be involved. As you mentioned, Amanda, I do some pretty high conflict ones as well, where we've got dual restraining orders. We've got some where I've been advised to the attorneys that they can't even be on the same emails
Mhm.
or contracts.
Mhm.
So in those cases, I don't even bring up the other party's name during the transaction. And that has been a huge shift in the last couple of years in my business, because again, until I had more extensive training and experience, I realized that's actually not a good way to handle it. So I let them know, my job is, again, to be the neutral third party. Don't worry about what the other person wants or is saying. Let me take care of that. Let me help you get to what's important for you. And once they realize that I'm there to help both of them move on to the next chapter of their life, it can make it a lot easier versus them thinking that I have some loyalty to one side or another.
Yeah, certainly. And, selling your home and moving, and is a very high stress event on its own. And when you're doing it in the midst of a divorce, it only compounds that. And so I think the way that you handle it with the clients, I imagine, really can take that stress level down for them and take out at least that one piece of it, right? Take out the feeling of having to argue with their spouse over, or soon to be ex-spouse over everything, and having you there to work through that transaction with them, and knowing that you're really thinking about what's going to be best overall. And, I think that most realtors just aren't thinking about those little things, and they can make a huge difference in the how smooth the process goes, as well as, I imagine, what they actually get for the home, right? Because they're working together better. You're able to hopefully just the whole process moving more smoothly. So
Yeah, and certainly you have some scenarios. It's not uncommon if the out spouse, it hasn't been into the property in a while, especially if they're not getting along, and there's some deferred maintenance in the property and they're upset, and then trying to figure out the best solution. So oftentimes in real estate we want to try to sell a home for top dollar as best as we can. But oftentimes in these situations, they don't necessarily have the money or want to spend the money on fixing the property up. Oftentimes, sometimes I will help the clients out, but sometimes that's not even a possibility. Sometimes the property absolutely has to be sold as is. For whatever reason, people can't get into the property to make things more livable, or whatever the scenario may be. It's certainly, as we're all opening up now, COVID made things a lot more complicated in these family law scenarios. And some of the challenges that I saw come through the Family Law Bar Association, I mean, with custody and just problems that we never even thought we'd have to think about. So certainly, I think that it's important to sort of remember those as you're going through the process and try to figure out what is the best way to help these people move on to the next chapter. And sometimes that means selling the property as is. Sometimes that means that, it is okay to get some renovations done. And then certainly depending on if people are living in the property or not, that affects that as well.
Yeah, certainly. And one thing too, though, is that, Bridget, I know that you often can help out with clients, even if they're not certain if they're going to sell, or even if they don't end up selling at all. What are kind of some other ways you do assist through the divorce process, even if it doesn't end up being that they want to sell right now?
Absolutely. That's a great question, Amanda. So a lot of times I will get contacted by a couple going through a divorce, or one party that says, my family law attorney referred you to me, and they said you could help me kind of talk through some things. Oftentimes, one of the reasons why I do the intake up front before even talking about selling the home is I want to figure out if both parties actually want to sell the house. Because oftentimes one party does not want to sell the house. Maybe there's memories there, or they have an attachment to the house, and they're not sure whether or not they can afford it or not. And so oftentimes my first method of assistance is to connect them with a certified divorce lending professional like Jason Gordon. I know you know him, and he's very active in the family law community as well. So oftentimes I'll call him, give him the scenario, and then have him reach out to the party and run the numbers to see if that's possible. There's a lot of good things that have happened for homeowners in the past year and a half because of how much our property values have gone up. One of the downsides, though, is because the values have gone up, it's harder to do what's called a buyout. So a buyout is when one party wants to try to buy out the other party. And oftentimes in San Diego, our homes are our most valuable asset. And so depending on if both parties are working, have good jobs, and can qualify to do that, may or may not dictate whether or not they can go ahead and do that. If not, then they have the option of holding on to the property. Oftentimes, they'll decide that they can't do it on one income anymore, and they will end up eventually selling the home anyway. Or if they can afford to do it, they'll do it to a certain till a certain time. Like, for example, if they have kids, when the kid gets out of high school or something like that, then the home will go for sale. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. And sometimes I will get referred a party who wants to go through the process. And depending on what's going on in the background and with the case, it can take 2 or 3 years
Mm-hmm.
for the actual process. And I think that's one of the reasons why there are so few realtors and professionals who are truly focusing on this niche, is because it's not it's not immediate. I mean, some of these people for years and years and years, and oftentimes I have family law attorneys who contact me constantly for advice on their cases or things or that, but there's not always a property to sell. So certainly I am happy to be a sounding board for our legal community to kind of help them get through their cases, whether or not there's real property for them to sell or not.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's very important. And I think that, what you talk about of really understanding their interest is, to us as mediators, really important to hear, because, I think some realtors would just focus on, okay, we're going to get the house sold because they want that sale. Back to what you said before, kind of, being told to push for as many and as much for sale as possible. And so I think that I'm really taking the time to understand what they both want. And if one of them does want to buy the other one out, like you said, I always tell them that the first step they need to do is to talk with a lender. And too many family law professionals don't think about that piece of it. They then put in place all of these agreements and then realize later that the spouse can't actually qualify to buy them out, right? And that's an issue. So it's so great to hear that you are thinking through those pieces and directing them to the right professionals.
Well, and I think that you could speak to this more than I can, but I think the family law community in general over the last few years has really changed, and people are starting to understand a more collaborative approach than before. I think a lot of times people used to think, all I need is an attorney. I just need an attorney to get through my divorce and then I move on. And now there are so many people that can help this community that is struggling to move on. We've got divorce coaches, we've got personal coaches, there are certified divorce financial analysts, we've got divorce lending professionals, mediators. I mean, Amanda, you're probably busier than you've ever been because of everything that has happened. And I think also a lot of attorneys are a lot more open to these kinds of things versus, having to go to trial. And I think it's wonderful to see this community grow so much in such a positive way, where we can all work together and help these people kind of move on to the next chapter of their life.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think too, it's also you can tell the professionals that really care and want to help these people out, like you're talking about, knowing that it may take years for you to get a sale or to actually move forward with a couple, but that you're willing to still work with them and wanting to help. And I think that sets apart from, we were talking about this a little bit before, that I will often get, just marketing materials from so many different realtors who I feel like just see it as, oh, you're a divorce mediator. You're going to have people who need to sell their home. I want to try to work with your clients. And to me, there is a big difference there between professionals like yourself who care about the clients and want to help them. And there are I think you're right. The field has grown, and there are a lot of professionals who do really care, and that's wonderful to see. And it's making sure that we direct our clients to those people so that they're being taken care of and helped in the best way possible. So something I wanted to talk a little bit more about that you brought up, because I'm seeing it a lot, is the idea that the way the market is right now, especially in Southern California and in San Diego where we are, although I'm seeing it with my LA clients and, all throughout the state as well, is that the housing prices have just seemingly skyrocketed, and the value of the homes, whether it's perceived or actual value, I know that may be different, but that value has gone up so much that it is causing some issues in divorce cases where one spouse really wants to stay in the home, but at the value that the other spouse is putting on the home, looking at what things are selling for and things like that, they can't, because they can't afford to buy them out, to get a mortgage, all of that. And what I'm seeing is the spouse that is the one being bought out isn't going to settle necessarily for a lower value, because they're seeing what their neighbors sold for, what the house down the road. I mean, I've got a couple right now where that was the whole conversation is, there was an appraisal, but then there was looking at what's actually happening in the neighborhood, and they were very far apart in value. So I'd love to hear from you and get your opinion a little bit on how is that affecting what you're seeing with clients?
I think you hit the nail on the head, Amanda, as far as the appraisal. A lot of properties are having appraisals done, even traditional sales, and they're not coming in at value. So in this market, a lot of buyers have agreed to pay the difference or pay some portion of the difference. And so for an out spouse who wants to sell the property, they're going to think, well, gosh, it's best for us to just throw it on the market and see what we can get, because oftentimes people are willing to pay more than what the appraised value is. Now, I will say in the last 4 weeks or so, we have started seeing an increase in inventory on our market. So I'd say about 60 days ago. So, we're recording this in early July. So early in May, we had about 18 to 1900 homes on the market, which is extremely low. A normal market is about 8 to 10,000, which we haven't had a normal market in probably 9 years or something like that. But that being said, as of this morning, we're at almost 2,600. So it's a significant increase, but not enough to make a huge dent. So we're still seeing multiple offers on properties, maybe not 20 offers. We might still be seeing 5 or 10, and that will probably continue. There are no signs to really show that that's going to change. So for homeowners debating whether or not they should sell their home, it's probably not going to see a significant shift from that perspective for a while. However, it can cause challenges for selling the home. A lot of times with a divorce case, everything is very strategic. We need to do something by a certain date. We need to plan, X, Y, and Z. And so certainly a little bit of a slowdown in the market can affect it, but I don't see it causing too many problems, because now we're not shut down like we were before, where we had issues with showings and things like that. So I think that as far as the sales on the divorce side, there won't be any negative factors just yet. However, with the buyouts, I think that's really where it's going to be challenging is, when interest rates start to creep up a little bit more, it's going to be even harder for people to do buyouts. And so I think, as we see more and more of that change, we're going to see more people go from the buyout to selling their home. I've already seen it in one case I just finished up. Their intention was to buy out the property. They were in the process of getting, pre-approved and all of that to do a buyout. And then the in-spouse lost their job. And so not directly related to COVID, but just did. And so at that point, then they called me back and said, okay, never mind, we've got to sell the house because I can't afford the payments anymore. And so fortunately in that scenario, they did extremely well. And even though they didn't own the property very long, they did very, very well. Another case I closed recently, this was a 3-year case that they had been trying to sell and had issues with realtors not knowing the process. they had some issues with one of the spouses trying to delay things. And so it got to me after 3 years of struggles. And then fortunately, with the market being the way that it is, once we were able to get everybody on top of things, then we were able to sell it, and everybody was happy in the end. But I think that the thing is, we all have to remember there's a lot of emotion in this, on top of traditional selling your home emotion. And so I remember an attorney once told me, and I'm sure you've heard this before, is, in criminal court, we see the worst people on their best behavior. And in family law court, we see the best people on their worst behavior. And I always try to remember that when there are challenges in the sale of the home, is that, these are typically good people who are just going through a nightmare, and my job is to help get them to the other side, and other professionals, like yourself, to kind of guide them through the process and help them get there so that they can move on.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think that, there's the nightmare and the difficulty of the divorce. And as I said before, I mean, trying to sell and buy a home and move, none of that is stressful, or none of that is easy in the best of times, right? And so that really, certainly, compounds that. But yeah, I mean, I think what you're talking about is correct, and we're going to continue to see that. I mean, it's something I hadn't thought about in detail, is like you're talking about, as interest rates do go up, that takes a whole nother effect on whether they can refinance, whether they want to refinance, because so I've got clients with such low interest rates that they go and they look and they're like, well, I'm going to be, nowhere near where I am now. And it's not sure whether they want to do that. And I think that, one of the things I'll say on the side of for mediation is that there are creative options. And one of the things that we really try to do with our clients is, take into account what their interests are, and then think about ways to maybe creatively structure things. And that can't always happen. There are going to be situations where there is only one option, and that may be that they have to sell the home, but there are options of owning it jointly still. There are ways to put in place agreements about how that happens. And I think that it's just our clients have more options if they're both willing to work together and do that. So it's not going to be everyone going through a divorce, but certainly situations that they may have felt, well, my only option is to sell, there may be other things to discuss. So I think that's important. And one of the things too, though, that I'm seeing in addition to all of this is the feeling of, okay, well, we could sell our house and we could get top dollar for it, but where am I going to go? And, I think it's definitely a little encouraging to hear that the inventory is going up. And I've seen that some, looking myself at what's out there, I was kind of feeling like there was more on the market than there had been. But I'm hearing from people the concern of, they're not gonna be able to find another place. And also, I mean, I know you don't do renting, but, also where I'm just hearing that it's so hard for people to find affordable rentals too.
That's a really good point. So I have recommended a couple different things to my clients that are doing that. Oftentimes, at least one party is already out of the house, so they have somewhere where they're staying at, where potentially they can stay for a short period of time. But then I have somewhere, they didn't have any money and they are living on a friend's couch, and that's certainly challenging. I think one thing that's important for people to remember is that typically the proceeds of the sale do not go straight into your pocket. Oftentimes they'll go into a trust account, and the proceeds get distributed from there. So you're not going to have the money on the day of the sale. Even in a traditional sale, it still has to go through escrow, and the figures have to be done, and then wiring it out. So trying to buy a house after selling a house is challenging unless you have everything set up and you can qualify in advance. So oftentimes I see them get into short-term rentals or even long-term rentals. Right now, I see a lot of them going into rentals long-term, thinking, well, the market's going to continue to go up, but right now I just can't afford to buy a place. Or I'm living in a sizable house, and I don't want to buy a small condo or a small townhome. So I'd rather just rent for a little while and save up or whatever it is that I need to do. And that's the other challenge is, going from two incomes to one income and then dividing it out because you've got all sorts of things going on in the middle that need to be figured out. And I think a lot of people don't always think that through of how it really is going to affect them financially. And I have one case where they contacted me. They own 3 properties here in San Diego. They're very fortunate. That's not most people. So I'm helping them figure out whether or not they're going to keep 2 properties, and one gets the other, and then maybe we sell the third and it will help them pay off the mortgages for the other 2, or whether they're going to sell all 3 or keep all 3. But most people are not in that situation where they own multiple properties and they can kind of divide that out. And so you have to work with them. And I know you do that on a very intimate level of figuring out, okay, what makes the most sense for you?
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's really important. And I think that, ultimately kind of, as we wrap up today and kind of I think about like what are the main things I like, want my clients to think about when it comes to real estate is, working with those professionals that help you think through those options, right? Whether that is whatever situation you're in, if you are in mediation, if you are litigating, having that conversation and making sure that you're working with the right professionals, from the realtor to the lending professional, to think, okay, what are the options that we have and what do we want and how are we going to get there? And, understanding that that may have changed in this market, but it may still be the same if you really think through, what's important. So I think first and foremost, it is working with those professionals who not only understand divorce, but care about working with divorcing clients.
Mhm.
That it's not just because they see, I don't know, gosh, the cross way to say it, but because they see the money there. But it's actually those, professionals who care about it. And, also just getting all of the education and the information that you can. And I think that, Bridget, you mentioned whether it's for the clients or whether it's for the legal, family law professionals, being that sounding board or resource to be able to help them with that. So before we kind of wrap up, those are kind of my top 2 things. I don't know if you have anything additional or thoughts of like, what you would really share with anybody who is, going through divorce and trying to figure out what they might do with their real estate at this time.
Absolutely. I'm happy to speak with anybody who is going through the process. Matter of fact, sometimes I get referrals from other realtors who say, "Hey, my client is selling their house or needs to sell or whatnot," and that's fine. I'm more than happy to help them with the selling of the property and then refer them right back to their original realtor, and just sort of help them through that. But oftentimes the calls I get, they're not always necessarily going to sell their home. And I'm happy to just kind of chat them through the process and help them decide whether or not that is. But I would say over 50% of the time, they don't end up needing me. And that's perfectly fine. So if you have questions or you are going through a divorce right now, feel free to reach out to me and I'm happy to help you. There are about 60 of us across the country who are certified divorce real estate experts. So if you're outside of San Diego, I may have a contact for you. Feel free to reach out and I'm happy to put you in touch.
That's great. And Bridget makes it nice and easy because her contact information is on her screen, but we'll also make sure to put it in the comments both on YouTube as well as on our website. So you're able to find Bridget, reach out if you have any questions, whether you're looking to sell or not, as she said, and just, figure out where things are going in this crazy market that we've got here in San Diego. And as I'm sure is not just here in San Diego, but that's where, where we are. So thank you, Bridget, so much for joining me today. Really enjoyed having the conversation and always enjoy, having you help our clients. I know that you always take great care of them and really are putting their interests and their needs first. So thanks again.
Thank you so much, Amanda. It's always so wonderful chatting with you. And thank you for everything that you are doing for the legal community. You are such a leader, and you haven't been bragging about yourself nearly enough right now. So I'm going to take a moment and do that. I mean, you really do go above and beyond for your clients. I know I've sent quite a few referrals your way of people, and I've heard nothing but wonderful things. I know when I was getting married, let's see, when was I engaged? About 8 years ago. Your firm was really helpful in guiding me, talking through a prenup. So I think a lot of times people think of you only for that, but if you're thinking about even getting married, it's probably a good time to make a quick call to Amanda and her team to see if there is something that they can do to sort of help you so that you don't have issues later on.
Well, thank you, Bridget, so much. So you can find us online at westcoastfamilymediation.com. You can also reach us by phone at 858-736-2411. And just like Bridget, we're always happy to speak with anybody who might have questions, who might need other referrals to different professionals within the divorcing field. So even if you may have an attorney already and in litigation, we'd be happy to provide referrals for whatever you're looking for. So thank you so much. And again, thank you, Bridget.
Thanks, Amanda.